Welcome back, Cor Unum cohort, to more about ideas. We want to get a clearer idea of ideas. And so we looked at these different categories of ideas, and now we want to ask some philosophical questions about ideas. Now, here's the thing about our philosophy section together. We're going to ask a lot more questions than we have answers for. So this is all about asking questions. At the end of this, you're going to want to know, what's the answer? And I don't know. Some of these things will come to some pretty clear answers about, but not all of them. Some of this, it's about asking the questions. So the first question we want to ask about ideas is, where do they come from? Where do all of these things in our minds originate, right? And in the history of philosophy, there's been kind of two main camps in understanding where our ideas come from. And in fact, a lot of the history of epistemology is just the back and forth between these two camps. So the first camp is what we might call an experiential account, or the technical word is empiricist. So think of, if you know the word empirical, if I want to verify something empirically, it means through my five senses. I want to see it. I want to touch it. I want to smell it. So maybe all of our ideas come from experience. And, to a certain extent, that makes a lot of sense. Why do I have an idea of a cat? Well, because I have experienced a cat with my sight and my touch, etc. Well, what about a unicorn? I have an idea of a unicorn, but I've never experienced one. Well, I've experienced a horse, and I've experienced, animals with horns. I don't know, a narwhal. Well, it's just a compounding of those. So that seems pretty, common sense, this empiricist account. Well, there's two variations here. We'll call them empiricism 1 and empiricism 2, for lack of a better term. So two flavors of the empiricists here. Empiricism 1, this just means experience here. Experience is assumed to be of both physical objects out in the world around us, outside of our minds, as well as of our own inner mental states, right? So what is it that we experience? We experience the world around us and our own feelings, right? That makes sense. That's common sense. According to this view, all knowledge would ultimately be based on our outer experience of things such as other human beings, animals, trees, buildings, tools, toys, physical objects of all sorts, and the properties we find in these things. That and our inner experience of joy, pleasure, pain, sensations, thoughts, etc., and all the contents of our mind. So this is this empiricism 1. Every idea we have just comes from experience of the world outside of us and our own interior world. This is the account of the origin of ideas closest to the common sense understanding of where ideas come from. In fact, I would have guessed, if we would have gone into this cold and I just asked, where do your ideas come from? You probably would have come up with empiricism 1 here. Well, there's also another flavor of this, empiricism 2, or we could call it representationalism. What's this? Well, according to this view, experience has as its direct object only our own perceptual and other mental states. Really? It's only the contents in our head, if you will. That is our own ideas. Where these ideas are all ultimately reduced to the sensations proper to the 5 external senses, right? Colors, sounds, flavors, odors, feels, like tactile feels, and our own sensation of inner states such as pain, pleasure, and emotion. But according to this view, even our external senses, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, even those external senses do not put us in direct contact with the objects and properties of the physical world. That's the difference between empiricism 1 and empiricism 2. Empiricism 1 there assumes that when we see a cat, we're seeing a cat, and that's the object from which we're getting those ideas. This says not so much. This says empiricism 2, what we're really, the objects of our, these external senses don't put us in direct contact with those objects in the physical world. Rather, our immediate awareness, what we're immediately aware of, has as its object our mental representations of these things, or immediate sensory ideas of these things. Now that takes a second to get used to, or to think about, but here's the basic idea. It's that the common sense view says, well, when I have an idea of a cat, it's because of the cat out in the world, right? That makes sense. This empiricism 2 edits that a little bit and says, well, yeah, maybe the cat's out there, right? But what I'm really perceiving is just my perception, right? Look at an object around the room. You know, I'm looking at a red book. What I'm immediately in contact with, that says, this empiricism 2, what I'm immediately in contact with is really my own mental state. So it puts us back in our heads further. You might think, well, that's kind of odd, and I agree with you, it is kind of odd, but there's some good philosophical arguments that go behind this, that really our perceptions, we're kind of behind this veil of our own perceptions. Well, in any case, with this empiricism 2, all of our ideas, even highly complex ideas like mathematical concepts or ethical concepts or political concepts, must ultimately be constructed out of these sensory ideas, right? Perceptions of shapes, motions, locations, colors, sounds, flavors, odors, tactile feels. So again, the only difference here, both of these assume that I get my ideas from experience. Empiricism 1 gives a lot more weight to the world outside of me as an origin for those ideas. Empiricism 2 says, no, it's what I'm really in touch with are just my interior perceptions. Okay. In distinction from empiricism, it's getting harder and harder to say. Empiricism, or the experiential account, is an innatist account, or this is known as the rationalist account of the origin of ideas. This one says at least some of our ideas are innate. That is, they're inborn. I don't get them from the outside world or from my perceptions. No, they're just there. There's a variety of different explanations as to how ideas are innate. Plato, for example, thought that we're just remembering. We're remembering those ideas that could be thought of as kind of like ideals, such as goodness, justice, beauty, mathematical concepts, in particular geometry. So he's got this in one of his dialogues, this scene where Plato is teaching the Pythagorean theorem to a boy without really teaching him. The boy, he just kind of leads the boy to discover the Pythagorean theorem for himself, right? This mathematical geometrical notion. And so Plato says, look, I'm not teaching him, he's just remembering. And for Plato, it was remembering from a past life. Well, that seems odd, huh? But other philosophers thought that certain concepts simply come with the equipment of being rational. Like a rational mind just comes with certain ideas. Concepts such as the general idea of things, properties, existence, cause and effect, right? Where do we get our idea of cause and effect? Maybe that's just innate in us. Maybe space and time, maybe change or limitation and therefore imperfection. And some would add even the concept of perfection and therefore implicitly God. So again, the point here is this question, where do our ideas come from? On the one hand, you have the empiricists. They all come from experience of some sort. And then you have the innatists or rationalists who say, well, maybe some of that, but some of it at least is just inborn in us, comes with it's hardwired into us as rational beings. And the debates between these two groups form much of the history of epistemology. Now, I've got some other videos in the playlist here for you to watch that will also kind of explain these two accounts.